Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Now. I'm your host, Karly Iacono. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Choon Lee, the CEO of Abstra and Abstra Point, to tell us all things wonderful about AI in commercial real estate. Choon, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me, Karly.
My pleasure. We met, I believe, for the first time at ICSC during an AI-focused panel. And I know you're heavily into the AI side of real estate. So I was so happy when you came up and introduced yourself, and we allowed for an opportunity to continue the conversation. So great to see you again. And I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, thank you.
So why don't you kick us off and give us some background on Abstra and Abstra Point, kind of what the difference of the two companies are, why you founded them, and what they're all about.
Yeah, so I am actually a veteran in prop tech. I've worked on prop tech for maybe about 15, 20 years. And 15 years ago, a friend of mine who was a well-known broker in Los Angeles approached me because he had a problem to solve. And that problem was lease abstraction. And at that time, I had very little idea how lease abstraction works. And that was really my entry into AI, because I thought that was the only way to solve the problem.
And that was 15 years ago, you said?
15 years ago, yeah, 15.
Wow, you were really on the fort. That's a long time.
It's about 15 years ago. I first tried to solve it with traditional tools, traditional software tools. And I thought my project with AI would take maybe 2-3 years, and became 15 instead. So it took a little bit longer than I anticipated, but we got there, and we built, as a result, one of the most powerful AI models on applications in commercial real estate. As a result, we can talk about that later. But that's really has been my interesting journey into AI. It's just thrown into that field, by accident in a way.
Definitely an early adopter, put it mildly.
So in my company, in Abstra and Abstra Point, what we do is we build applications for commercial real estate built on those technologies. Abstra does more consulting side also, while Abstra Point houses most of the technology. Not all of them, but it houses most of the technology that we built for commercial real estate using AI models. Not only, but AI is a critical part of that.
Now, you mentioned lease abstraction. What are some of the other key functionalities of the Abstra Point technologies that you've built?
Yeah, so the other technologies that we're building is, for example, site tracking. We basically address this space for retailers and tenants from, say, site selection to a site opening. In between the two post, let's say, there are many intermediate steps in between. Obviously, site selection, site management, site collaboration, and then you start talking about LOIs for a site, and obviously the lease, and then it goes to permits after the lease is executed. So along that path, there are many, many pain points there, right? And one of the many pain points is lease abstraction. And we noticed that it takes forever for people to abstract and summarize LOIs and leases. And everybody is more familiar with lease abstractions, but it's an enormous amount of time and energy and effort is spent on those administrative tasks. And that was very difficult to automate in the past, because the source documents are always different, right? So if I'm in a lease, if the lease is standardized all across commercial real estate, which will never happen, then sure, I can write a program to automate this. But every commercial lease ever written, ever drafted, even from the same company, is always different. So you can't really automate this. And the only tool available is tools like AI. So that's one area where AI can be used very effectively in commercial real estate.
For sure. No, a lot of talk about abstraction services and just trying to streamline documents in general. It's a big hot button right now. So you came from other industries before you started working in commercial real estate. I want to say 25 years, right? Kind of medicine and law, and you've got a very vast background. Why do you think it's taking commercial real estate so long to adopt these technologies? I feel like we're pretty behind, right, on the technology adoption curve. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are many reasons, I think. One of the reasons, that topic alone is very complex and sophisticated. We can talk about that alone for about an hour, but one basic reason is that commercial real estate is very relationship driven. right? So it's not only the technology there, but the subject itself is very relationship driven. How deals get done is not necessarily what's the better technology, but who knows who, right? And what the network is. And it's very results driven. And the other factor is many other industries, they had somebody who kicked in their butt, regulations, like in healthcare or in finance. And that has been missing in commercial real estate. So commercial real estate was like free for all, whoever adopts technology. And obviously we're human inertia, so we don't want to necessarily change unless it's absolutely necessary. And I call this the Newton's first law phenomena. You only change if someone or something forces you to change. That's just human nature of it. And commercial real estate is very similar in that regard. But at the same time, commercial real estate now is entering a space where the complexity and the scale is becoming almost unmanageable at some point. And it's not only a competitive advantage anymore, but it becomes a competitive necessity. And before I started building products, I've been dibbling and dabbling with commercial real estate, working as a consultant. And with pre-modern day AI tools, we were able to streamline, let's say, for certain companies, the workflow by 20, 30%. And that itself was considered as a huge success. But with the modern AI tools, we're talking 20, 30x. And 20, 30%, some companies can ignore. Nobody can ignore 20, 30x. It doesn't matter how much money you have, that kind of thing, and how much resources you have. And that has fundamentally changed in the age of AI.
So you said, and you are correct, it's a human-centric business, commercial real estate. It's about the connections and who you know and who you're going to do business with. And so what makes this moment feel different? Is it just the exponential time and potential cost savings that companies are seeing from AI? Or why do you think adoption could actually take off where it's been so slow for the last decade?
Well, I think one fundamental issue is that we have been building many systems in the past that's really information storage based, right? CRM system, listing systems, mapping tools, databases kind of thing. But what's really changing right now is that we can build AI system that's fundamentally suited for knowledge information, do something with knowledge information that we have available. And I think a lot of things that people get wrong about when they talk about AI is not AI, all AI is the same. And very often they're being treated the same. And then one good way to think about this is I distinguish three different tasks in that where AI plays a role, which is first is generative, second one is derivative, and the third one is analytical. Generative tasks are tasks that where say an AI system, create something from brand new, create me a report, write me a letter, write me a report or something. It's really generative in nature. The second one is derivative in nature. Derivative meaning I have this big commercial lease, 40-page commercial lease. I want you to summarize this to exactly, one page with these data points kind of thing, right? So that's derivative in nature. You don't want anything created. It's literally the opposite of generative task. The third one is analytical. Analytical means you're trying to predict something. You try to forecast something, right? Best example is Netflix. Netflix, from your viewing behavior, tries to predict what movie you want to watch next, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Those are three very different types of applications that most people put this in a one single pot. And the reason why it's important to distinguish is because you have to build systems differently based on that task type, because the accuracy requirement is different in that. How you build system is different. What technologies you can build is different for those three tasks. And I think what's really different now is that generative-wise, in the past, before we had these modern AI systems, we couldn't do much about that, And also, my field is the derivative part, the second part. In derivative part, also huge progress has been made in that area. And that is also an area. The third one, the analytical part is still something lagging, but that is for me, I see where the future lies within AI is how can I make better decisions? Not only how can I have the better information available that most companies these days already have, they have databases, but how can I have how can I make best decisions? How do I know which tenant to strike a deal with if I'm a landlord or vice versa, right? But that's really what the area is.
Now, in terms of the tools, I like that you divide it into three use cases or types of AI. I think that's interesting. And of course, we have, let's just use Claude, right? Claude can generate images, not that great, but it can, right? It can write and generate new content and can analyze information and maybe do some predictive analytics if you give it the right data sources. So if we have general large language models or LLMs, why do we need specific tools for different use cases? And how are you defining what a tool should do when you are creating it and putting everything else to the side? Walk me through the difference of the large language model and what it can do versus a specialized tool and why we need both.
A good way to start is to understand how an LLM really works. An LLM works by making really good guesses on the next word. We call it autoregressive models, basically, right? So basically, the good example is to say, complete the following sentence: Happy birthday to, right? Next word, you. Most likely you. Why? Because if you take all the text out there on the internet, or any text ever written by the human beings over centuries, the most frequent word that follows after happy birthday to is you. So basically think of LLM as a gigantic probability map. And every word that the LLM spits out is literally a prediction of the next word that comes out of it, right? It's similar to also me saying, okay, Karly, don't tell me, but let me guess, you had some kind of a caffeine drink this morning, right? So it's the same idea, right? Most people, why? Because why do I know? Because 90% of Americans drink coffee in the morning, kind of thing, or tea in the morning, right? So LLMs work basically autoregressively. They guess the next word, but just because you guess the next word doesn't mean what the content is. I don't really know what you had for this morning, but it is a very, very good accurate guess. And that is really how you build systems with the limitation of the systems are. So AI systems are very good in, let's say, the modern day LLMs are especially good in compiling text together that can help you in your certain task, but it doesn't really know. It cannot really necessarily make decisions like we humans make, like a broker does, or like a landlord does, or like a typical commercial real estate expert does, right? It knows from patterns in the past it has been trained on what answers to give, but it really doesn't know the answer. That's the misconception, because when we talk to humans, right, they spit out an answer that instantly gives us an idea, okay, that person knows the answer. But an LLM, although it spits out the answer authoritatively, it doesn't really know the answer. It just has a very, very good guess on that answer. Like, I'm able to guess very authoritatively that you had coffee this morning, right?
I did not. So you would be wrong, right?
Well,
In your
I just hallucinated,
prediction model. That was like a great example that would be the best guess, but that is not what I had. Although I did have caffeine. So there's so many nuances. So you've mentioned, and I agree, that data is really the backbone of all of this, right? Processing data, accessing data, looking at it. So in commercial real estate, data has been murky or hidden, right? Moated among certain firms or ownership structures. And that's just kind of one of the nuances of commercial real estate, that data is not unified. So over time, do you think AI is in its available, I guess it's hopefully ability to process large swaths of data will reward the larger firms, or will it reward the smaller firms or more individuals who are now able to process more information faster? Who's going to benefit from this most? Is it he who controls the data and will maintain control and grow? Or is it he or she who is maybe a smaller fish in commercial real estate and has less access previously, and they'll now have this hidden superpower? Who's going to benefit?
I think AI can be an enormous equalizer, right? In the past, the larger companies like CBRE had the resources to build the biggest databases. And typically in the past, the companies with the biggest databases are usually the winners. That is beginning to change dramatically, I would say. It's not only the ones with the biggest databases, but the ones who know what to do with it, right? How can you standardize it? How do you know? A lot of the tasks is about the transferring information from one place to another.
So how do you think moving forward, we're going to approach liability when companies are using AI for complex and very high dollar real estate transactions? Let's say AI reads a lease term wrong or a deal term, or gives the wrong information that's relied on by the human, is liability, in your opinion, always going to sit with the human who is employing or using the AI tool? Or do you think that there's some liability that would shift to the companies that make these tools or the creators of the LLM? Like, how do we gauge who's responsible for errors in the future?
Well, the errors, in my view, always needs to lie on the person and the company who uses the technology, right? You cannot blame or sue a spreadsheet, right, or database.
Right.
Right? It doesn't matter. Even sure, an AI model is more sophisticated than a spreadsheet and a database, but you cannot sue the technology for it, right? So ultimately, it lies in the hand of the person or the company using that tool, and to bear the responsibility of that. And then it's the responsibility of the company to make sure there are certain systems and processes in place that errors do not occur, right? And depending on how sensitive that area is, you may have to put more or less verifications in place, human verification, system verifications, as you mentioned, guardrails in the past, right? Something has to be in place, and it's the responsibility of the company to make sure, depending on what that is, if a human life is at stake, you obviously have to put enormous amount of effort in to make sure the data is right, like an airplane, right? 1 out of 10 million, that's the threshold we need to have before we can put an AI technology into that place. While somewhere in other places, it might be cost prohibitive, where the error rate is more acceptable, right? It's a lease abstraction. You may not need 1 out of 10 million. Maybe 95% is very similar, because right now that is done by humans. Humans are really abstract, and they make on average about 5% errors when they do that. And this is deemed as acceptable risk, acceptable error rate, right? So, but there are very different error rates that you have to address. But in the end, it's what's so deceiving is AI systems come across as authoritatively, but they're really not. They don't really know the answer what it is.
So you've kind of touched on it, but I want to dive in deeper before we wrap on what your vision for the future is. So let's say 10 years from now, you are creating and that's a long time in AI speak, right? 10 years from now, maybe we should only make it 5. You're creating an AI native commercial real estate company. Not a prop tech company, like a CBRE type company. Lots of different services, lots of business lines. What does that company look like in 10 years with all full adoption? How does it function? What are the human roles? What's your vision? Give us the sci-fi near-term future here.
Okay. I think one of the biggest misconceptions people have about AI is that AI automatically means it's autonomous. And for me, they're 2 very different things. So there is knowledge, there is intelligence, there's autonomy. For me, and we tend, in our part of a conversation, we tend to put all 3 together in one bucket. And for me, something can have enormous amount of knowledge but be dumb as a log. Or something can be very intelligent but has 0 autonomy, or vice versa. Right? A robot can be very autonomous, but it's not necessarily intelligent, right? May not have necessarily enormous amount of knowledge. So for me, I distinguish those three areas. So I don't necessarily see a future of AI where an AI system basically does all the work, all the decisions that we humans today do. So if you look at the life of a commercial real estate professional, a broker, a retailer, or whatnot, or a landlord, there are certain tasks, especially administrative tasks, that an AI system can help enormously to make this better. But it does not necessarily mean such a system in the future can make decisions for you. So depending on the tasks, the adoption of AI technology will be very, very different. As I mentioned, in those derivative tasks, lease abstraction being a good example, or LOI summarization is a good example, there enormous progress can be made, right? But it doesn't mean it knows for a landlord with which tenant you should be working with or something, right? That is a whole different type of technology that will be much more difficult to adopt. And so that's autonomy involved, right? Autonomous technologies involved. While information, you have this enormous amount of information, but what to do with that information is really where the next frontier lies, really, where to use that, how to use that information and use it more effectively. So in other words, I don't really see a future with AI where it replaces human beings, but I call a term assistive intelligence, right? AI for me stands for assistive intelligence, means it assists in whatever we do tremendously in our tasks, right? And when we do our tasks, certain tasks, we still will be in the loop. I don't foresee a future where you'll be gone in 10 years and it's all done, because that full autonomy, for that, you almost need Sentinel. You need to build a system that's Sentinel, that's really conscious about itself. And we are a long way for that. But a system that can help you for a certain task, I call them single dimensional tasks, also known as, say, intern tasks. We do a lot of processes, tasks. You can hire literally intern to do that. It's part of our work, our job. Those will be all gone if they're not gone already with AI. But tasks that typically requires more judgment, more human relationship building, more problem solving, right? When it requires out of the box thinking, right? So in my field, design a user interface with 20 input fields, but it can't be complicated, right? So that in order to do that, that's not easy to do. So that requires enormous out of the box thinking, and commercial real estate has the same type of problems, kind of a thing, right? That requires enormous human interaction and human insight in order to solve it. I don't see this anytime being replaced by any system, including AI systems. So really, AI for me doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. I look at this really as assistive intelligence, where it really supports and helps us what we do, be able to do this much better, faster, and quicker. So
I think we can agree that it's a very exciting time, and the future holds many new discoveries, some of which we probably can't even fathom right now in the near term. So it's going to be a fun conversation to keep having, and we'll have to reconnect in, I would say, a year. But again, everything's so quick, maybe just a few months, and see what's new.
Exactly.
Well, Choon, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on AI. It's been a fun conversation, and can't wait to see where this goes. And I wish you the best of luck with your companies and their continued success.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Karly.
My pleasure. To everyone listening, that was this episode of Commercial Real Estate Now. We're so happy you tuned in, and we will see you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.